Legend to the War here, and today we're doing another tier list using Tier Maker. This time what we're going to be doing is doing a rework tier list. So I'm going to be talking about every single race that's available to play in Total War Warhammer 3, and talk about their past reworks if they've had one, and also talk about which races I think are in need of further rework, and which ones also don't need some rework. So before we get into it, I do need to let you guys know that this video here is sponsored by Manscaped. As you guys know, I've been with Manscaped for a while now, and I usually talk about the razor because it's honestly the best razor I've ever had. But today I want to talk to you about the hygiene products, because we all need to use hygiene products, right? Unless, of course, you're a follower of Nurgle. You know, whether it's shampoo, conditioner, body wash, deodorant, I use all of these products to help get rid of all of the Nurgle corruption that happens to be infected with me at any given point. So it's really useful for that. So if you're interested in scrubbing away all that dirty, disgusting Nurgle corruption, then check out the Manscaped Platinum Package 4.0 and check out the link in the description for 20% off and free international shipping. Big thanks to Manscaped for supporting this video. Okay, with that being said, let's get onto the tier list. Now it's really important that I make the distinction here that this is a rework tier list. It's not a content tier list. I'm not talking about which of these races need more DLC. I am for any and all of these races to get more content. This is about their existing mechanics and how they feel, and whether or not they feel good or feel bad, and why. Alright, starting with the Empire, we're going to go this in the order that they came out, so Warhammer 1, then 2, then 3. Alright, so the Empire, I'm going to put that under needs rework. I don't like the Imperial Authority mechanic anymore. I used to be okay with it in Warhammer 2, because they got a rework in Warhammer 2, and it was okay. And in Warhammer 3, I'm just not a fan of it. Mostly when I play the Empire in Warhammer 3, I just want the Imperial Authority mechanic to go away, and I'm mostly just playing to try to get it stabilized. And I think that's kind of the point of the campaign, but I don't enjoy it. That's the problem. And I think that the most important thing with these mechanics is that they have to be fun. And I think that the Imperial Authority mechanic at the moment is just not enjoyable. I don't enjoy having random dilemmas come and derail my campaign, or waiting for luck-based things to occur, because I'm the kind of player that just wants to do something and have a cause effect, not just hit end turn and wait and cross my fingers and hope an event shows up, because that kind of gameplay is very passive and boring, and I just don't enjoy that. But I also want to make the distinction here that I'm really only talking about Karl Franz and Gelt's campaigns, because they're the ones that get the Imperial Authority mechanic, whereas Marcus Wolfheart and Volkmar the Grim don't have the Imperial Authority mechanic, and their campaigns are fine. I'm not a big fan of Marcus Wolfhart's campaign, but I think it's way better in Warhammer 3 than it was in 2. Overall, I definitely think that there's some massive room for improvement, especially with the Prestige mechanic, because in Warhammer 2, for example, that became outdated really early on. And Warhammer 3, given the massive size of the map, Prestige just does nothing in the second half of the campaign, assuming you're even going to play that part of the campaign. So they need more late-game options with the Imperial Authority mechanic, and they also need early game for it to feel a little bit more under the player's control, like a little bit more influenced by the player's decisions rather than random bullcrap luck, because that's what's currently going on, and I just don't enjoy that. Okay, next up is the Dwarfs, and I feel like the Dwarfs are actually fine. I think that they could benefit from a rework, but they definitely don't need it. All of their mechanics work. They're not fantastic. They're not the most fun mechanics, but they work. I think that the Oath Gold mechanic in crafting your own items is good. I kind of feel as though it would be good if there were some better items in there, because at the moment there's only like 1 or 2 standout items that I pretty much only go for. And I think having a better array of good items would stop me from spamming Iron Warden tankers, which is pretty much the only thing I get. So definitely could benefit from some tweakings, but it really doesn't need a massive overhaul. Okay, moving on to the vampire counts. So this is a bit of a weird one, because I really enjoyed the vampire counts in Warhammer 2, but I'll admit that they definitely needed a rework. This is a faction that has only ever gotten one DLC, and that was like the first DLC, and the faction is really falling behind, mechanically speaking. Now, it kind of got a rework in Warhammer 3, but I don't like the rework at all. So I'm actually going to put this under desperately needs a rework. I kind of feel as though a rework is on the horizon for them. The thing is with their current rework is that they're more powerful now than they used to be. But man, are they boring. such a boring race to use. They've probably got the most boring roster and some of those boring mechanics. And the fact that they can revive half of their army after losing a battle, that just pisses me off. It's not a good system. You know, it's mainly benefits the AI, and for people, it mainly benefits like benefits losers basically. So losing a battle, you get a reward, and I don't like those kind of mechanics. And typically speaking, I just don't enjoy them. I think their economy is definitely a lot better than it used to be, but whenever I play the Vampire Counts, I just don't enjoy them. And I think it is primarily because of just how bloody easy it is, and how you just can't really lose with the Vampire Counts, and it's not fun. Like, you hit your maximum potential pretty much straight away, and I just don't feel like that's what should happen in a Total War campaign. I feel like, you know, you should be working towards your late game armies. You should be working towards, you know, your most powerful abilities. You shouldn't unlock them by turn 10. That's not really a good gameplay system, and that's kind of what goes on. You just unlock your best abilities really early on, and then you just use that for the entire game, which is kind of what happened in Warhammer 2 as well, but at least it still made you work through the rest of the campaign. So yeah, I really think that the Vampire Counts need a massive overhaul, because their current system I just do not think is fun. Okay, next up we've got the Greenskins, and I actually think the Greenskins don't need to change a thing. Everything works really well with the Greenskins. I think that their economy is good. They got a bit of a boost in Warhammer 3. The war system works well. All of their lords work well. All their start positions are good. The scrap system is good. Their army roster is good. You know, they could always use more content, but I just don't have any feedback in terms of the Greenskins. I enjoy the way that they play. I think they work well. I think they're thematic. You can't really go wrong with them at the moment, so it works well. Next up is the Warriors of Chaos. Now, I really like the Warriors of Chaos rework, but there is one issue that I have with it. So one thing that stopped it from getting Don't Change a Thing, and that is confederations. I think some more work needs to be put into confederations. I understand that not every legendary lord should be able to confederate every other legendary lord. Like, for example, Valkyr confederating Azazel doesn't make sense. I get that. But the fact that only Be'lakor and Archaon can confederate the others just doesn't feel correct to me. Also, there are some pretty blatant exploits that you can do with... I mean, you can do loads of exploits with all the races. Total War has always been full of exploits. But, you know, if you're playing one of the dedicated... Warriors of Chaos, for example, Valkyr, you can load characters from a Nurgle campaign, as an example. So there's some things that are a little bit iffy with the Warriors of Chaos, but overall it's a very good rework. But I really wish that they would go in and have a look at confederations and give every legendary lord at least another legendary lord that they can confederate. So, for example, it would be good if Valkyr could confederate Festus, for example, because they're not necessarily at odds. Or maybe Valkyr could confederate Kolek, something like that. Even if there's only one, I think it would be good to have more than one legendary lord in your campaign, because I really think that a lot of the enjoyment in a late game campaign for Total War Warhammer is having your armies commanded by different legendary lords, which is why the one legendary lord races kind of get a little bit boring early on, because then you just get generic lords commanding them. You just don't feel as attached to them. Okay, next up is the Beastmen. So I was a big fan of the Beastmen rework. That's probably my favorite rework so far. They've been hit with the nerf bat for sure in Warhammer 3. They're not quite as powerful as they used to be, but that's fair enough. They were kind of overpowered in Warhammer 2. But mechanically speaking, they're exactly the same, and mechanically, they work really well. So I would say don't change a thing, although secretly, I would really like the Champion's Essence to not be crap anymore. But that being said, there are better items out there anyway. So I think that if there was any feedback to give, it would be good if those items, which they do cost a fair bit of favor, were a little bit better, because some of them are a little bit on the crap side. So giving you a bit more incentive to get them would be nice. But that's really the only criticism I have. I love the Herdstone system. Their armies work well. I think another thing is that maybe it's not really as cost effective as it could be in terms of increasing your unit caps is very expensive compared to like getting some of the faction-wide upgrades, which is why whenever I play the Beastmen, you'll often see me have armies full of Ungors. It's not that I just want Ungors, it's just that I can't accumulate enough dread fast enough to increase my unit caps faster than what I can increase my army caps, which is more important. So I think a little bit of a rebalancing of that would be good, but apart from that, I really like the way the Beastmen play. Okay, then we've got the Wood Elves. Now, I wasn't a big fan of the Wood Elf rework. It's probably the rework in Game 2 that I was least a fan of. However, even though the rework hasn't changed at all since from Warhammer 2 to 3, the base game systems in Warhammer 3 mean that the rework is actually better for them. So they work really well in Warhammer 3. My major concern with them in the previous game was supply lines. Them having 15% for every new army ended up with them crippling their economy if you got too many armies. Just like a couple of armies even. But in Warhammer 3 with 4%, that feels way more reasonable. This means you can have more armies without your armies completely blowing out of control in terms of upkeep costs. So overall, I feel like the Wood Elves feel good. There's definitely some room for improvement, I think. It's definitely not my favorite race to play, and I think they're a very strong race. But overall, I feel like their rework is pretty good, and it should be a pretty low priority to go back and give them another rework. Just some tweaks here and there would be good. Okay, next up, Bretonnia. So Bretonnia is a race that I've always been a pretty big fan of, ever since they were essentially an unplayable race in Warhammer 1. But in Warhammer 3, in the current patch, they don't feel good. They felt okay when I was playing it in early access, but then they made some patches, and they don't feel good anymore. And it's largely because they can't build walls in their minor settlements, and that made a big difference. I mean, their economy feels fine, and their Val system is fine. They got rid of the free Knights cheese, which, whatever, it was due for that. But overall, I kind of feel like Bretonnia desperately needs a rework, because they're probably one of the least popular races in Warhammer 3 at the moment. So a bit of love and attention would be good. I think that they have a lot of potential to be a really good race, but it might also be a combination that they need some DLC. They actually have no DLC. Everything's FLC for them. But yeah, a bit of attention for Bretonnia, I think, could go a long way. So I think that they desperately need a rework. Then we've got Norsca. Now, if you had asked me this in Warhammer 2, I would have put Norsca under desperately needs a rework. But all the systems in Warhammer 3 benefit Norsca. The fact that they can occupy all settlements, the fact their economy is way more robust than it used to be, supply lines being a lot more manageable, all of this stuff works really well for Norsca, and I'd say they feel good. They've got a little bit of a nerf since the game first came out, but that's fair enough. They were kind of overpowered. They're still pretty strong, but I think what is kind of hurting them at the moment is their actual campaign objectives. When you actually finish your campaign, what was supposed to happen doesn't happen anymore. You fight those challenges and then nothing happens. So some extra work onto Norsca would be good. It's more of a case of Norsca kind of needs some bug fixing, more so than a rework. But yeah, they almost got under Don't Change a Thing. Their biggest problem is their late game. Alright, so that's the Game 1 races. Now onto the Game 2 races. High Elves. Now, if you'd asked me this in Warhammer 2, I would have said Don't Change a Thing. I loved the High Elves in Warhammer 2, but they were also one of the most overpowered races in the game, but I just really enjoyed them. Now, with the systems in Warhammer 3, I'm not as big of a fan of the High Elves as I used to be, so I'd say that they feel fine, but they could probably use a bit of a touch-up. I think that their biggest concern at the moment is confederations kind of feel a little bit frustrating to get, where previously it was like, all you had to do is just be friends with them, and then they would confederate. And I feel like as the most diplomatic race in the game, that felt good. But now there's like all these other weird conditions that are a bit frustrating to overcome sometimes. So I think that this faction here could use a little bit of work, but overall it's not like a top priority. It's still a good race to play. Okay, Dark Elves. So Dark Elves have never been a particularly popular race, I feel. I'm not entirely sure, but I just get this feeling like people just don't like Dark Elves. Now, the thing is, in Warhammer 2, I was like okay with the Dark Elves. I kind of liked them. I kind of got that they did need a little bit of a rework in Warhammer 2, but in Warhammer 3, I don't like playing Dark Elves at all. I feel like these guys here desperately need a rework. I kind of feel like the funny thing is they actually just got a rework with their slave system, right? But I think it's so bad that they need a complete overhaul. They just don't work well in Warhammer 3 at all. And it's not because they're weak at all. It's the same problem that the vampire counts have. These two factions, these two races, are extremely powerful. But man, are they boring. They're such boring races to play. The mechanics are just not enjoyable to interact with. And I think that's something that Creative Assembly really need to address, is the slave system for the Dark Elves is just boring as hell. So that's what I'd like them to address there. It's just too passive. You're just not really interacting with it as much as you could. At least nowhere near as much as the other Game 2 races, except for maybe the Lizardmen. Okay, so Lizards now. I feel as though the Lizards need a rework. Not desperately, but they do need a rework. They've gotten a fair bit of DLC. They've got 7 Legendary Lords, which is one of at the higher end. They used to have the most number of Legendary Lords up until the Warriors of Chaos. But I think their biggest concern is the Geomantic Web. The Geomantic Web is just boring. All it does is improve your commandments. And the commandments, while they are slightly better than they were in Warhammer 2, all they do is provide passive buffs. I feel like there is something active that you should be able to do with the Geomantic Web. You know, improving the Geomantic Web, giving you something that you can actually manipulate and do something with in the actual game. Whether you spend tokens or whatever, I don't know. But the current system is just way too passive, and so a lot of people will probably just forget about the Geomantic Web, or not even realize it's even there in the first place. So you can go through an entire campaign and completely ignore the Geomantic Web, and it not really heavily impact on your campaign. That's the sign of a bad mechanic. You shouldn't have their primary mechanic being ignored like that. As for the DLC race mechanics, they're all pretty good. I'm happy with the captives for Tehenowin. With Oxyodal's mechanic is good, and now with Nakai's mechanic, I actually think it's really good. His horde mechanic works really well. But yeah, the main thing here is the Geomantic Web, which Nakai doesn't deal with at all, but the others do. So yeah, that's the main thing I think the Lizardmen need to do. Then we've got the Skaven. So Skaven is my favorite race to play in Warhammer 2 and 3, and in Warhammer 2, I gotta say they felt a little bit better than they do now. But that might just be due to various tiny little changes. I don't think it's necessarily a mechanical issue on their part. And it might also be due to the fact that the AI doesn't throw as many enemies at me as they did in Warhammer 2. And that really benefits the Skaven, because the more enemies that get sent at you, the more food you get, which allows you to expand faster. So I'd say that they actually don't need to change a thing. What actually needs to change is the game itself. So it's not the Skaven's fault. It's not my fault. It's not the Skaven's fault. It's the game being too easy. They need to have a tougher time. They need to have more enemies thrown at them. And also, I think the system with them gaining food is a little bit weird, in that 90% of the food that you gain from defeating an enemy army is obtained by killing the Lord. If you don't kill the Lord, you don't get the food. It's kind of weird. So overall, I think the Skavens is a really fun race. That Warhammer 3 is just it's just a bit weird dealing with Skaven at the moment. Okay, then we've got the Tomb Kings. I've always really enjoyed the Tomb Kings, and I've never felt like they've been an overpowered race. They've always been sort of a mid-tier race. I'm going to put them under feels good, because I think that the only thing that you could do to really sort of make these guys a bit more enjoyable is, aside from adding content, is work in some kind of confederation mechanic. It's really good now that you can increase your hero capacity. That's a massive improvement for the Tomb Kings over Game 2. I'd even go so far as to say in Game 3, Tomb Kings are better to play than they were in Game 2, and I really enjoyed them in Game 2. But I really feel like there should be some kind of confederation mechanic. I get the fact that Cetra should not ever be confederated into any other race, but Cetra should be able to get Khalida. And maybe Khalida could confederate Arkan the Black and Cathay. So maybe some kind of conditional confederation would be really interesting. But the current system of just no confederations, I think they can do better than that. That's the only real complaint I had with them. Now we move on to Vampire Coast. So, this race here, I feel like they're okay. I'm going to put them under feels good, but it's the same sort of issue with the Tomb Kings. Like, I don't enjoy the Vampire Coast as much as the Tomb Kings. I feel like they're a more powerful race than the Tomb Kings. It's just not necessarily my cup of tea playing as them, but I don't think they're a bad race. I think that some kind of confederation mechanic would be good. I understand why it isn't there, due to the fact that if you have too many of these, like, legendary lords with pirate ships, with their, like, constructible ships, it kind of gets overpowered. But the thing is, even if you did that, they wouldn't ever be the most powerful race in the game. I still feel like Khorne and the Beastmen kind of take that cup, even if they could all confederate. So I feel like just giving them the ability to confederate each other wouldn't be bad. It would actually just be more fun to play the Vampire Coast. That's probably one of the main reasons why I don't play them. Because, typically speaking, when I play a race, as I've said before, I do like to collect the other legendary lords of my race. And seeing the other legendary lords and not being able to confederate them, I just don't really like that very much. So, I think they feel good, but they could use a bit of a tweak. Okay, then we've got the Game 3 races. Now, when it comes to confederations with these ones here, we need to be a little bit more lenient, because most of these guys only have 1 or 2 or 3 factions available within their race. So, you know, Demons of Chaos, for example, can't confederate. However, Demons of Chaos needs a rework, okay? Mainly just due to the glory system and the demon dress-up game. It's not good. Its current implementation, not good. Great idea. Really, really great idea. You got to go back and do some more work on it. It's not finished. It's half a bun in the oven. It's not good enough. They need to go back and rework it. I'm not even going to touch damn Daniel until he's actually interesting to play, because I'm not interested in demon dress up. I'm just not interested at all. So they need to rework this one. But this is a mechanic. This is a faction that I really, really want to enjoy. It's just there's just not enough content, really, in just what mechanically he can do. You run out of stuff to do way too early, way too boring. Okay, Khorne. Don't change a thing. Love Khorne. I wouldn't adjust anything about Khorne. Only one legendary lord at the moment, of course. But all of the systems of Khorne, I think, they just hit the nail right on the head with that one. And yeah, I wouldn't change anything from the blood host mechanic, to the way that they occupy settlements, to their economy, to their ability to keep moving after they've raised settlements, to Scarbrand. Everything about what they've done with Khorne is a very powerful, but it also has a very high skill ceiling. The thing is with Khorne is that in Warhammer 2, I hated using melee infantry armies because they just felt so limp dick useless, right? But Khorne in Warhammer 3, I really enjoy using melee infantry because it actually works for the faction. So, like, their tech tree, their building system, their heroes, their lords, their units, I feel like everything about Khorne is just correct. They got it all right. Okay, as for Tzeentch, this is a faction that I really should have been, like, perfectly aligned with, but I just couldn't really get that into Tzeentch. I played a full campaign with them, and I was like, I had to really push myself to finish it, because a lot of the time, it suffers from the same sort of problems that the Vampire Counts and the Dark Elves play. You reach your max potential very early on, and your armies are boring. Your mechanics are kind of passive in that they're just like cheat codes. You just press a button and it just does it. It's not really skill-based. And so I kind of get a little bit bored with Tzeentch. And so I kind of feel like Tzeentch needs a bit of a rework. Very powerful race, for sure. But I think there's a lot more that they can do to actually make Tzeentch a little bit more interesting. I just think it's a little bit boring at the moment. Which is very sad for me to say that, because thematically, they fit right in line with my playstyle, much like the Skaven. You know, I would never have expected, you know, a year on, that I'm, like, praising Khorne and dissing Tzeentch, but it just doesn't feel right at the moment. I think they need to give more active mechanics, and, like, I don't want the cheat codes to go away, but I kind of want to earn those cheat codes a little bit more. It's too easy to do it at the moment, and it's also way too easy for the AI to do it, so I think the systems for Tzeentch are just not very good, and they could use a rework. Okay, then we've got Nurgle, and Nurgle needs a rework. Yeah, Nurgle just needs some work. way too passive. Same problems that Tzeentch has, except all of their stuff is super weak as well. Their army sucks. Their economy kind of sucks. Like, just about everything about Nurgle is literally and figuratively shit. So I just think that they need to go back to the drawing board with Nurgle, retouch on the plague mechanic as well, the plague cauldron, because a lot of the stuff just doesn't really have a lot of impact. I just don't think it's... I think it's actually the least interesting of the Game 3 races, if it wasn't for this one here being... like, that one's an interesting race that isn't been done well, and this one is a race that's been done thematically well, but isn't interesting, in my opinion. But maybe that's just me being heavily aligned to Tzeentch and therefore opposed to Nurgle. That could be the case, so I need to check my own bias there. But I do think this one needs a rework. Okay, then we've got Slaanesh, and I think Slaanesh is great. I wouldn't change anything about Slaanesh. The vassal system was their biggest problem before, and they've more or less fixed the vassal system, so I'm pretty happy with how Slaanesh plays. I really enjoy playing as N'Kari, so I don't think he needs any changes right now. The only thing he needs is more content, that's it, and you know, this isn't not that tier list, so I'm really happy with Slaanesh. Okay, now as for Kislev, I really like playing Kislev, and I think that their biggest concerns are probably early game challenge is a bit tough for them, but that's just because of how many enemies get thrown at them. I'm going to put them under feels fine, but I think this is one of the ones that people will probably disagree with me on, because there are definitely some issues with Kislev. I think that their motherland mechanic, like the competition between the Ice Court and the Orthodoxy, is okay, but I don't like how it auto-confederates them. I feel like you should be given a choice to either confederate them or vassalize them or force them into a military alliance or something, because oftentimes when I'm playing as Cathay, I actually don't want to confederate Castalton because he's doing a good job as an ally, and he just auto-confederates, and I don't really like that. And that being said as well, you have such an impossible time confederating Boris. He just refuses to confederate a lot of the time. So there is some things here that I think could use a bit of work, but overall I feel like Kislev, it's a good start for, you know, essentially a new race. Because Kislev is not... I don't think they had an army book, I'm not entirely sure about that. But they could use a bit of work, but they don't need an overhaul. Okay, then we've got Cathay, and they're pretty much under the same boat there. I think Cathay feels fine. There's definitely some more work that can be done there, but I don't really have anything to like really pinpoint and say this is a problem. My major issue with them was the Bastion mechanic with the Kurgans constantly attacking, but I think they've toned that down a fair bit now, and it feels a lot better. I think it's a little bit annoying trying to get a confederation between the two legendary lords, but that kind of makes sense. You're not really supposed to, I just really want to, that's all. It's a lot easier now than it used to be, but I think that they could use a bit of a tweak to their economy, a bit of a tweak, just make them a little bit more interesting. Like the Wujing Compass is a little bit just not that interesting. Passive mechanics. Really want to try to avoid those sort of passive mechanics that you just like press a button and then stats go up. I think the yin yang system is pretty good because you're constantly having to manage that. So overall, I do enjoy Cathay. I think they feel fine, but they're not in this category or this one here. Okay, then we've got the Ogres. I don't think Ogres are very popular at the moment, or really have ever been. I kind of feel like they feel good, or feel fine. I'm going to put them under feel fine. I definitely think they could use some work. So, I feel like the camp system is really good. I enjoy making the camps, and the fact that you can essentially infinitely keep increasing the number of camps is good. I mean, you can only put one in every region, so there is an upper limit. But before the limit was like 10, and now it's 554, or however many settlements there are. So the camp system, I think, has been fixed. I think that the contracts, right from day one, as soon as I heard about them, I knew that was going to be crap. I think that they're still crap. They keep buffing it, but it needs a bit of work, because it is not a good system, because every single faction in the game already has a similar system. The game will just give you missions. Be like, assassinate this lord, kill this lord in battle, or whatever. and you can choose to ignore it or do it, and you get a bit of a reward. And it's basically the same thing here, except you just get a redundant thing. It's like 500 gold if you go and kill this lord. But if it's not convenient, you're not going to go and do it. You're not going to take your army that costs you 2,000 or 3,000 gold per turn to go and kill someone that'll give you 1,000 gold and 10 relations with a faction. The contracts are shit. So they really need to do something about that, because I just pretend they don't exist whenever I play as the ogres. Outside of that, I'm fine with the fact that they don't build walls, the fact that they only have 4 build slots in all their settlements. I feel like that works because of the camp. The camp is like where they get all their good stuff. So I do enjoy playing as ogres, but again, not one of my favorite races, so I don't think they couldn't use a rework. And they're not bad enough that they need to be a top priority. So that's my tier list there. Let me know what you guys think in terms of which factions need some attention and which ones don't need attention. These ones here, I don't think need any rework whatsoever. These ones here, they probably shouldn't get a rework. These one here could use a bit of an update. These ones here should get a look to, and these ones here desperately need some major attention, I think. I think that one might be a bit contentious. That just might be me being anti-Nurgle, but I really don't like the way that Nurgle is currently playing in Total War Warhammer 3. Anyway, that's my current tier list. Let me know in the comments below what you think. I appreciate you guys. Don't forget to check out Manscaped. Link in the description. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time.